So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to night one of our micro conference in UX Methods in Action. It's presented by SDXD in partnership with the Denver UX Newbies, featuring some incredible speakers from ServiceNow. As we've seen in the chat, we really appreciate your attendance and continued support from around the world. My name is James, and I'm president of SDXD. For those of you who have never attended our events before, our goal is to foster education, connection, and inspiration. And our goal is for you to learn at least one thing you can immediately apply the following day at work. And we think you'll get much, much more tonight. I'd like to thank you to my organizing board who helps put on these events, and then plug our event next week, which is Bringing Research Findings to Life. We'll be featuring Paige Bennett, a design research manager at Dropbox, and she'll be discussing ways that you can make sure that your research findings stick on in the hearts and minds of all your stakeholders. Next, I'll hand it off to Lene from the Denver UX Newbies.
Hi everyone, nice to see you again. This is Denver UX Newbies. We also like to provide some education to you all and just try to have some networking fun. We don't really have a mission statement yet, but it's something like that. So you can change the slide, James. This is our Denver UX Newbies board. It's me, Lene, hello. And then we have Chelsea and Ryan helping out as well, and they just waved. Next. So our upcoming events for Denver UX Newbies, we have an awesome UXR panel with SDXD. We're both doing another event together in October 21st. And we'll just have a nice panel of wonderful people who can help us learn more about user experience research. In November, we're going to do another more uplifting event. It's about some people that have recently gotten hired during these hard times, and we just want to hear their story, get some tips on how we can get hired as well, and just hear what they have to say about their journey. So that should be uplifting and fun. In December, we decided to try something different since we've been doing a lot of different educational events lately. We want to try a holiday party. So we're just trying to plan that right now, and we'll have more information on all of these upcoming events coming up shortly. So now I'm gonna hand this off to Paul, who is here with ServiceNow. He's gonna tell us all about our speakers tonight, or the organization they work for.
Great, thanks, Lene. I'm Paul Hong. I'm Director of Product Design for ServiceNow's IT Workflows business. And I'm just going to share a little bit about us as a company, and then also the design organization at ServiceNow. So ServiceNow is a technology platform company, 100% cloud-based, that powers the workplaces of some of the most successful organizations in the world, some of the largest organizations in the world. We automate and orchestrate business and technology workflows. And we like to say that we're the operating system for businesses, especially large-scale businesses. So at ServiceNow, we have a culture of deep customer centricity. Experiences are first and foremost in everything that we do. So we focus on deep customer understanding, understanding their needs and goals, creating amazing experiences that not just meet their needs, but exceed their expectations. So we strive to not just make people more efficient, we make them more productive, and we like to think we make them happier and feel even more empowered at work. And so the experience organization, which is what we call the design organization here at ServiceNow, we not only apply like the best practices that are generally accepted, but we really push the state of the art in thinking about enterprise design. We bring consumer grade experiences to enterprise. We have over 300 designers, researchers, content designers, and content developers located across all of our major offices in the US, Netherlands, India, and Israel. And we show that enterprise design can be just as inspiring, fluid, and delightful as the best consumer brands out there. Our work is really meaningful too. So think about this, and this is something that we remind ourselves about a lot, which is people spend on average about a third of their entire lives at work. We work to make that significant portion of people's lives more enjoyable, productive, and empowering. And we believe that people should love their work, and we make sure that the tools that they have at work make that possible. So as you can see from these pictures, we're highly collaborative. We take our work seriously because what we do is hard but so fulfilling and enjoyable. But we don't take ourselves too seriously. And seeing these pictures kind of is it's a little bittersweet because in this era of the pandemic, we're not doing these things in person anymore. So it's nice to see these pictures, but I miss those days, and hopefully we'll get back to them soon. So we really like to connect with each other. We really like to have fun with each other, and we really like to just do excellent work. So thank you for joining this virtual conference. You'll see, from the speakers, the caliber of design and research and content folks that we're so lucky to have as part of ServiceNow Design. So I think Curtin is up next, and she's going to share some of the opportunities that we have, especially in the internship program in early career.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. It's super nice to meet you all. I'm Curtin Bazaz. I am a senior design program manager on the operations sides within our experience organization. So things that our team is kind of responsible for is around culture and onboarding and a lot of our hiring efforts. So I was invited here today to just speak a little bit about our most current role that we're looking to fill in this season, which is around our early career hiring. And so at ServiceNow, the opportunities we provide for early in career, and so primarily for interns, is around the programs, the opportunities, and the candidates. And so that's how kind of it's categorized. When it comes to the programs, it's a 12-week traditional internship during the summer. A lot of the focus is around professional development, building community, so giving them a sense of belonging, even though right now we're all remote and we just had our cohorts end. And then also a lot of giving back opportunities, so volunteerships with different organizations we partner with. The opportunities for internship roles across ServiceNow are pretty much in every single organization we have. So around software, IT, design and research, sales, finance, global talent, marketing. And then when it comes to the candidates, there's only really one rule to qualify for an internship, and that is that you are currently enrolled in a college or university, and that you are going back to school post-internship. So you could not, for example, be graduating in May and then start an internship in June. You would have to be still enrolled to go back to school post your internship ends. And then if we go to the next slide, I'll just kind of dig a little bit more into our organization and in particular in the design org. We have opportunities for UX research, looking for both on the operations side and UX research intern, and then also in the UX and visual design space. In the design space, we're also looking for operation interns as well. And then in product content, we're looking for both technical writing interns and technical editing interns. And you will all be getting this deck. So just so you know, if you're interested or you know someone who would be interested in applying, you have hyperlinks in the titles of each box, and you also have kind of the full links in each box typed out. And that's pretty much it. I can just share some fun facts. We are very keen and very well invested in our interns. So our internship programs in the Experience Org grows about 35% year over year. And our conversion rates are something we're very, very proud of. And just for the cohort that ended this summer, we converted about 93% of our interns from this summer to come back either as full-time or as return interns, depending on what they qualify for post-graduation next year. And so we're looking forward to bring on even more interns for next year and continue to have a great program for them and provide them with opportunities. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my part and hand back over to Lene.
Hey, thank you, Curtin. That sounds really awesome. I'm so excited for that and that you were able to share that with our group. Thank you. So tonight we have some great things coming up. We have 3 amazing speakers that will be speaking for a little while, and in between each one, we'll have a 5-minute break. We'll do a couple questions too, just maybe 2 or 3 questions in between, and then we'll have a panel Q&A for more questions at the end. So our first speaker, first of all, please don't be shy. Ask questions and engage in the chat. Well, we're going to be checking that chat for questions, so make sure that you're putting your questions in there, and our speakers will try to answer those in between those presentations and after. So our first speaker is Veena Nath. She is a UX researcher at ServiceNow. And prior to ServiceNow, she's worked as a market researcher and user researcher across industries for Heinz, Intuit, and Roche. She's helped teams innovate and take action on insights by leveraging design thinking. Outside of work, she loves to travel and has been to 40 countries and speaks German. So Veena, whenever you're ready, you can take it from here. And I love your experience. It sounds really exciting that you know all these different languages and been to so many countries. That's awesome.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Excited to talk to everyone today. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, just make sure you guys, can you see my screen? All right, great. So we're going to talk about user experience best practices. Really, how do you create those awesome experiences that your users will love? You know, I am a senior user researcher at ServiceNow. I've been there about 10 months. And so today, here's the agenda that we're going to cover. I'll first share an overview of design thinking, why it's important. We'll talk a little bit more about the key components and then specific tools that you can use. And then lastly, I'll talk about those key takeaways. So what is design thinking? It's simply a human-centered framework for creative problem solving. And so why is that important? Deep understanding of your customers, their pain points, their problems, their needs and motivations can really help you design those better products, services, and even internal processes that solve for your customers. You'll be able to build those products and services that really reflect your customers' needs and then ultimately go beyond their expectations to delight them. So there are three main components for design thinking. First, you know, you want to really get that deep customer empathy to discover and define the problem. So this is where where your customers are at. You're going to observe them, really understand the problems that they're having, their pain points and wish fors. The goal here is to really crisply define the customer problem and the opportunity space. The second component, you're going to want to go broad and explore lots of ideas. The ultimate goal here is to narrow on the best possible solution through validation. So here's where you're going to come up with lots of ideas and using customer feedback, narrow in on that solution that works the best. And then lastly, you'll go through a process of rapid iteration to develop, test before you launch, and refine your ideas to deliver the ideal outcome to your customers. So let's talk about how this works in the real world. So when I was at Heinz, we saw a business problem. So we saw that more and more people were on the go and they were eating on the go. And so often they would use the drive-through. But what we did see was that they were eating less ketchup in the car. And so when we kicked off this project, we really wanted to get that deep customer empathy, understand the drive-through experience. And so we actually sat in cars with our customers to understand the experience, the pain points, the delighters. And so what we learned was that even though customers loved eating ketchup with French fries, it was just too messy of an experience in the car. So you can kind of see that in some of these pictures. So because it was so messy in the car, our customers would almost always forego eating ketchup in the car. So they would just eat fries on their own, even though they loved eating fries with ketchup. And so, you know, the reason being was that the problem, you know, it was just hard to use those ketchup packets. You know, I think all of us know how difficult they are. They're really small, they're hard to open and dispense from. So what did we do next? Once we understood the problem, the next thing that we did was really go broad and explore lots of ideas that could solve that problem of messy ketchup in the car. We looked at ideas like ketchup flavored French fries. So if we eliminated the ketchup, just kind of put French fries with ketchup flavoring, maybe that would solve it. The other thing that we looked at was even something like dry ketchup. So if you had dry ketchup, it fell on you, you know, you could just simply brush it off. And so we were even thinking something like that. So I'm sure all of you are thinking, dry ketchup, that does not sound very appetizing. So that's exactly what we learned from our customers. You know, there's something magical about pairing hot, salty French fries and cold ketchup. So what we learned is you just can't change the product. You know, the product is the product, so Heinz ketchup. But what we realized is that we needed to narrow and just focus on the packaging. So we kind of said, okay, we can't change the product. It is what it is. But the packaging, that's where we can really apply innovation. So that's kind of where we broadened again, and we looked at a lot of different packaging ideas. And so the next phase was to really rapidly iterate prototypes with our customers to understand which packages best solve for their needs in the drive-thru. One of the ideas that we really loved was this middle picture of having ketchup in a well in your drink lid. So we thought, oh, wow, this is going to be a great idea. It's going to solve everything. People can kind of dispense the ketchup there or get like a pre-filled cup that they just put on top of their drink. So we built a rapid prototype and actually gave this to customers. And we actually gave French fries, we gave ketchup, we gave them soda. And so after the customers had dipped their fries in the ketchup, they thought, okay, this works well. But then they took a sip of their soda. And then they were kind of like, ugh, I don't want to smell ketchup every time I drink my soda. That's not really good. So we didn't realize it was going to be such a big turnoff to have ketchup in that drink lid well until we prototyped that with our customers. And then we realized that's a no-go. So ultimately, where did we land? The solution was a package design where you could dip into the product for fries as well as squeeze out of it for burgers. It was 3 times larger, so you didn't really have to rip open and eat a bunch of different ketchup packets. So that's the Heinz Dip and Squeeze. So now, you know, now that we've kind of talked about that real world example, let's talk about specific tools that you can use to actually do this work. So the next thing that you want to first do is kind of think about how you'll do this. So the first thing you want to do is, again, observe your customers where they're at, ask them questions about their pain points. So you need to understand ahead of time, you know, what are the key questions that you want to get answered. You'll then have to go where your customers are at. So for example, in my ketchup, you know, what I shared about Heinz ketchup, we actually went to the drive-thrus with our customers. Next, as you start your conversations with your customers, it's really important to build that rapport, put your customers at ease. So for example, when I was at TurboTax and we did research, we didn't really start questions off with what tax forms do you file or what's your household income? We really wanted to understand who they were as people. And so we asked them, you know, who are they? What do they do? Kind of, you know, who's in their household? So we kind of asked these open-ended, broader questions before we asked them about their tax information. Next, it's really important to ask those open-ended questions versus those yes/no questions. You're going to get a lot better insights that way. And then lastly here, you know, it's really important to actively listen during your interview and debrief after. So that's kind of the how. And then thinking about the goals, you'll now need to kind of think about what are the goals for the research. So who are your target customers? What problems do they have? You know, what does the ideal state look like? And based on those goals, you'll need to think about kind of what are the appropriate questions to accomplish those goals. So again, you know, you'll want to start broad and then narrow in and dig deeper on certain areas. So one of the things that I really like to ask here is wish fors. So sometimes customers are really polite. They don't want to offend you. And they don't want to be negative sometimes. And so they're more likely to tell you what they wish for versus something that they don't like. So that's a great question to ask in that case. So the next thing, you know, once you've done that research, once you've talked to your customers, been where they're at, it's really important to debrief and synthesize all that information that you've gathered from them. So this will really help you define the scope, the problem that your customers have, and then it'll help you focus to think about what you need to do next. So a couple examples of how to do this are empathy mapping and journey mapping. You're actually going to be learning about these techniques today. a little bit later on. So once you've done that, the next thing that you'll need to do is go broad and explore ideas. So once you've gotten your problem defined, you're going to need to go broad and explore lots of ideas. The broader you go here, the better it is. You're going to have to come up with lots of ideas to come up with that one idea that works. So a couple of examples here are, how might we statements and crazy eights. They can both help you go broad and explore lots of ideas. These are things that you're going to be learning about tomorrow. And then lastly, once you've narrowed in on some of those initial ideas, you've gotten some customer feedback, you're going to want to develop and test those ideas out. And so here are a couple of examples of how to do that. You might want to do paper prototyping as well as usability. So at this point, you're thinking, wow, this is great. This was a really fun example. I'm getting hungry for ketchup and French fries. That was great, but this is not really applicable to me. So you might be thinking, I don't make ketchup, I don't work at a ketchup company. How can I use these processes and tools? So, in fact, you can leverage design thinking, and these methods and tools whenever you really need creative problem solving. So for example, in my career, I've used it to develop new products as well as optimize current products across different industries. I've also used it for services and processes. So when I worked in HR at Intuit, we leveraged design thinking to create a completely new hiring process to identify and hire top talent. This was eventually rolled out to the entire company. I've also used it personally for my career. So if you think about it, your career is a constant prototype, and you're always trying to learn about yourself. So you're getting that deep customer empathy. You're trying to go broad on lots of ideas, trying to figure out where to go next. And then you test out ideas. So either through internships or through different roles, and you're always trying to iterate on kind of what's that right role for you. So I definitely can share a great book that I can recommend in this space as well. So let's talk about the key takeaways for today. So one, why customer empathy? It's really important to line teams around real customer problems versus kind of the conjecture of what you think your customers want. So you do this to solve for the right problems and really reveal the opportunities to innovate. You want to fall in love with the problem, not the solution here. Secondly, why go broad? Here, the best way to get one great idea is to go broad on lots of different ideas and then throw the bad ideas out. And then lastly, why test and refine? So here, again, you want to test and learn from customers really quickly so that you can get better decisions done faster before you launch so they can really ensure customer delight. Great, and that kind of wraps up the design thinking. I'll open it up to the questions.
Thanks, Vina. That was awesome. We got one question to start things off. This is from Ryan. He asks, this seems like a lot of work. How do I know when problems are big enough to apply this process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly, it doesn't necessarily have to be a really big problem at all. It could be anything that you kind of have, either personally or professionally. It could be, as simple as, what should I eat for breakfast? So first, it's like get customer empathy for yourself. Oh, what am I interested in? Go broad with lots of ideas. Okay, well, there's the pancake place down the street, but then there's also a great omelet bar in this other neighborhood, and then narrow in on kind of the best solution that would work for you. So you could kind of use it for any kind of either product or service, either professionally or even for personal things.
Awesome, thank you. Another question. And then we'll move on to the next speaker and we'll follow up with the rest of the questions at the end. How do you know when it's time to move into that process where you're actually testing the prototypes with your users?
Yeah, so this whole piece is really a loop. And so you might, think, okay, well, again, in terms of our ketchup example, you might think, okay, well, we've realized that ketchup salt might not work. Let's try some packaging ideas. And then so that's where you might develop some prototypes. And then you might realize, like, wait, some of these prototypes don't work. Maybe what we need to go do is go back and get some deep customer empathy again. So you might actually step back. And so there's no definitive answer of when you're done with one phase and then go to another. It's really more of a loop where you can kind of either go forwards and backwards depending on what you're learning from your customers.
Awesome, thank you. Can we sneak in one more question? So the question was, what was the flip side? And this one I'm really curious about too, because I think it's something we don't think about too much, or I don't think about it as much as I should. But when looking at the ketchup problem, what was the flip side of the drive-through workers that have to deal with the new packaging? Maybe size issues or something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're probably wondering, wait, why can't I see these ketchup packets everywhere? These 3 times bigger, the Heinz dip and squeeze. Why don't I see that everywhere? And so the other thing, the flip side is, thinking about, who's actually using these products, the fast food customers. Since ketchup is a giveaway item, if you have a new package design that might cost more money, they're not necessarily willing to, because it's given away for free in the US, it might not work for all fast food customers. And so that's the other flip side to this, right, is that some fast food customers, you'll see these at Chick-fil-A, for example. There are a couple others that have it currently, but you won't see these everywhere.
Awesome, thanks, Vina. We've got some more for you, but we'll get them at the end.
Okay, great.
All right, next up, thank you, Vina, by the way, that was awesome. Really great stories. Next up, we have Jen Kim. She's going to talk about empathy mapping and getting to know your end users. Jen Kim is currently a senior content designer at ServiceNow. Before ServiceNow, Jen worked with companies and nonprofits such as Illumina, Martinelli's, Qualcomm, United Way, and LifeStraw. Over the past 10 years, she has helped organizations transform their online presence through effective branding, creative storytelling, strategic copywriting, and human-centered design, ultimately helping them achieve their business goals with scalable solutions. Outside her tech-filled world, she unplugs and explores the great outdoors. I also love the great outdoors. I wish I could be spending more time out there these days with these fires going on, right? So, yes, it's rough. All right, Jen, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you. Of
course. Let me share my screen. Oops, that is all you right now. 1 second. Can y'all see my screen? I'm gonna assume yes, because I can't see you all. Okay, cool. All right, so this is empathy mapping, and I'm going to be talking about how to get to know your end user. As Vina mentioned, it's super important in the process, and this is just one way to really get to know your user. So I'm Jen Kim. I'm a senior content strategist, senior content designer at ServiceNow. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years, so I'm a pretty recent add to the company, and actually content design as a department is a pretty new add to the company. So it's been a pretty exciting time for me and my fellow content designers at ServiceNow. So today, we'll go over how empathy can truly drive design decisions. And we'll go into detail of what empathy mapping is, when to conduct it, and what to do with it. So before we jump into empathy mapping, let's understand why you even create an empathy map. Have you ever overheard these types of statements in your design org? What's the problem again? That's uncertainty. Without insight, we're creating solutions without enough information. I wouldn't do it that way. That's bias. Our personal biases sneak in once in a while when we don't really know the user. Also, assuming that you know the user is problematic. My creative director told me to do it this way, and I'm guilty of that too. That's projecting. Since we don't have research to back our ideas, we could potentially blame others for our design decisions. So in order to remove some of these unfound opinions or assumptions, we really need to embrace empathy so that we can design a product for our end users. So here's a nice quote from John Steinbeck about empathy. You can only understand people if you feel them in yourself. And how do we understand people while designing? We look at activities like empathy mapping. Empathy mapping is an activity that produces a digestible visual reference of a user's behaviors and attitudes. Remember, this activity is only one activity to get to know your end user. Your product success is based on a bunch of different activities like journey mapping that Tara's going to go over. So let's dive into why empathy mapping is valuable. It'll help you gain insight. The ultimate goal of this exercise is to really get to know your end user, their fears, their needs, expectations, and so on. This needs to happen in tandem with other activities, but it's a great one to start with after some initial user research. This also helps frame your hypothesis for any additional research. Remember, empathy at its core is the ability to understand and share the feelings of one another. With this exercise, we're making our best assumptions of the emotions of our users. We can apply learnings from this and other research to create a more robust and truly accurate persona. Super important. With real user research from customer interviews, we can refer to this true to life customer persona as we're designing our products. Which brings me to the next value. We can make better design decisions. We can refer to this empathy map that we've created while we're designing. It helps us stay aligned and user focused, and it can actually influence product strategy. And an additional bonus to this empathy mapping activity is that this exercise really helps align teams. From a recent design thinking workshop that I was a part of back in December of last year, we all agreed that one of the biggest takeaways from the workshop was that it was the first time in a really long time that we're all gathered and kind of forced into a room to share information with one another. That was the biggest thing. Like, I never get to talk to the brand people sometimes. And so the fact that I was able to just look over and talk to them was pretty amazing. So in working at a big org, silos totally happen and it's totally natural. But this exercise really helped break down those silos, and it saved us from running into time-consuming roadblocks down the process. So who should be involved? Basically everyone. I know this looks like a pretty expensive list, but it's important to gather as many involved parties as possible for something like this. It's the one opportunity to get all decision makers and creators in one room to help define the problem before working on a solution. That's key. It helps to do this in a workshop with lots of different activities so you're not wasting too much time or of anyone else's day. Now that you're getting excited about empathy mapping, I'm sure you're asking yourself, how do I get started? Glad you asked. Before starting any very expensive workshop, we recommend setting out a roadmap for this activity. What are you going to do before, during, and after this workshop? First, expect to do some work before, including prepping your research and collateral for this activity. Then you'll host the workshop with everyone who should be involved. Make sure to have food. After the workshop, you'll need to share all the insight you gathered with anyone who would benefit from this information and wasn't able to attend the workshop, and that happens. This roadmap will also help set expectations for your participants. So let's go a little bit deeper into each of these steps. We all know that preparation is the key to success. So ideally, you would want to conduct some customer or user interviews prior to this activity. You'll need to synthesize this insight for this activity, like maybe creating a fact sheet of each customer, print it out, or hand it out to everyone who's going to be involved. And I recommend actually including real quotes from participants to use. It's also super important to schedule a dedicated day or two to do some design thinking activities. As I've said before, empathy mapping is just one activity that this group can do. Oops, sorry, 1 second. Also make sure to prepare the collateral to be used during the workshop, and I'll go over those next. So for the collateral, here's what we recommend as materials for this workshop. Print out those research handouts, have some writing utensils available, post-it notes, and some space tray. Lots of space, tables, walls, whatever. It's not up here, but I also recommend some tactile devices like like fidget spinners that might help people think and spark ideas. I'm totally not kidding. We had these like bendy clay things at the workshop that I was at, and it really helped just to get our brains going. And of course, most important, make sure to have big printouts of the empathy map template. Oh, like this. And I'll go over this in a bit. I see someone writing on the slides. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so materials are prepped. Now the environment. Create a workshop setting. Divide the big group into small groups. And I also recommend an unplugged workshop so that people are even more focused. So think no phones or other work to distract from this activity. There should also be a moderator to guide you through this activity. It can also act as device patrol. I know I suggested materials and environment that's more like in person, but one day, hopefully we'll be out of this pandemic and we'll be able to do all of this activity in person soon. But with the current state of work, an online whiteboarding tool like Miro is especially helpful and valuable for conducting this kind of activity. But if you are using an online tool, really try to encourage your participants to avoid working on anything else while using this tool. So now that you have everything prepped and ready, it's workshop day. During the workshop, gather everyone in the room, separate them into small groups. Each group should get assigned a real-life customer or user. Then once everyone has digested that research, each group should start jotting down their thoughts on stickies and then begin placing them on the map. Finally, after each group fills out each map, each individual group should present to the larger group. This is super important because it's an opportunity to have an in-person presentation of the material instead of assuming that someone will read this later. So I know you're all excited, so let's take a look back at that version of an empty map template that I showed earlier. So, sorry, one second, okay. So there's lots of empathy map templates out in the wild. This is just one version I put together for this presentation. Your group will start adding stickies to this map, moving clockwise from 1 to 7. Who are they? What are their goals? What do they see and say? What is their behavior like? What do they hear? What are their pains, gains, and motivations? And you don't need to go clockwise, but it just helps make sure you address everything about this user. Next, I'll show you what this map can look like. So this is an example of an empathy map. Imagine this is a bunch of stickies from different members of your assigned group. So to fill this out, I'm referring to an app called Fido that my content design team made up for another workshop. And to give you a bit of context, Fido is a totally fake app that matches users with fellow dog owners in the area to set up doggy playdates. Kind of like Tinder for dog owners. So I made up a completely fake but real customer for this example named Donna. Donna has used the app for a few times and has agreed to be interviewed about her experience. So that now that you know this information and reviewed her interviews, you can start filling out this empathy map. So start with number 1. Who are we empathizing with? What's Donna's role? What's her current situation? What are some, so her current situation might be that she works at 9 to 5 at an office. So you put that as sticky and put that in that quadrant. Then we go to Donna's goals. What's important to her? What does she want done? What are some decisions she needs to make? In her interviews, maybe she mentioned that she really needs a reliable dog sitter while at work. Stick that on there. Next, jot down what she sees. What's in her environment or marketplace? Is there anything that she's reading? So a sticky here could say, she actually mentioned that she walks by a local doggy daycare every day while going to work. So you write that down here. Then what does she say? Real or hypothetical works. You remember those quotes I mentioned? Plop that in here. So maybe one of the quotes is, she was very curious about how she's matched and how many other dogs that person has matched with. After you imagine what she says and she sees, let's imagine what her behavior is like. What's her attitude? How does she act in public? What can we imagine her doing? A sticky can say, Donna researches online and uses the messaging app frequently. Next, we move on to what she hears in her world, from friends, colleagues, and anyone else in her world. She's heard of a bad match from Fido, but she's heard that, it uses science to match owners, so maybe it's not so bad. Finally, we think about her thoughts and feelings. We're going deep now. jot down her pains, gains, frustrations, stressors, and any motivations behind her behavior. Imagining this will really help us with other activities in the design process, such as defining the problem and journey mapping. So a pain might be her dog needs special care and she's not sure if she trusts other owners. A gain is she would love easy scheduling and happy and safe dogs, of course. And some motivations might be guilt. She doesn't want to leave her dog at some random person's house. And maybe friendship. She just really wants to meet some fellow dog owners. So a tip in filling this map out, at first, everyone should use the same sticky color to post up thoughts. Once all the stickies are up, group similar stickies together in each quadrant to help consolidate and organize input from your group. You can use another colored sticky to label that grouping, such as maybe under the who they are quadrant. A lot of stickies mention that Donna works during the day. You group those together and label that grouping, Donna is a workaholic. So to create this, I actually used Miro, the tool I mentioned before, and Miro allows you to do remote live collaboration and apply stickies to the map. So it's pretty perfect for a time like this. So after you've completed some empathy maps, it's important to consolidate and share these findings with the rest of the team who weren't able to participate in the workshop, maybe in like a team-wide share out or during your stand-up. This spreads shared information across the org and helps minimize roadblocks down the road. From this, a product manager can make some product strategy decisions. Remember how Donna uses the messaging feature pretty frequently? Maybe the next sprint focuses on optimizing that specific feature. Or a marketing writer can take what's produced here to flex tone and come up with a concept that ensures Donna chooses Fido over that local doggy daycare that she actually walks by. A designer can use this to make better design decisions. You know, trust is super important to Donna, so maybe the designer implements some visual cues to ensure that trust. Designers can also use this type of information to eliminate uncertainty, bias, and projecting, things I mentioned before, when handing off their designs to a developer or a client. The possibilities are really endless from this. Not only does this empathy map help us empathize with users, it creates a shared document that everyone on a team can utilize. It's kind of a source of truth for the user that you're going to design for. It's also helpful to understand how empathy maps often create what's known as a UX domino effect. They can influence an entire project. They help define product requirements, product strategy, wireframes, etc. It's super important to do. So the next natural question is, when is a good time to do this? During the discovery phase, as Vina mentioned before. Ideally, it would happen after research, at the beginning of design exploration, but before setting requirements and concepting or strategy. And here you can see it on our map. As you can see, we do empathy mapping in that understand phase of discovery towards the beginning. And we're getting to know our users before we get to map their journey or define a problem to solve. It also helps to introduce this activity when you have a product that isn't working with your users. It'll help you figure out their frustrations with the product, peek into any inconveniences that might have poked out of the product, and any content that's confusing or irrelevant. And there are a lot of times where someone's like, I don't understand what this means. And then I have to go back, it's like, well, what's the experience level of this individual that we're writing for? So here's some key takeaways. To create a more useful and richer empathy map, try using real user research. Just don't just rely on only your assumptions. Using insights from a real customer will help us empathize with them better. It helps eliminate that bias and uncertainty. Try to have all critical stakeholders and subject matter experts in the room. This is part of the discovery phase where you want to learn as much as possible before creating a solution. Not doing this with everyone in the room will cause issues and time-sucking roadblocks later, trust me. And sharing is caring. Encourage your team to use this map to help make more informed and intentional design decisions and solve some flaws in the current design. And finally, this one's a given, but any activity requires some preparation or organization. Time is money. So thanks for listening. I hope this inspires you to get to know your users, collaborate with your teams, and create better products.
Thank you, Jen. I cannot wait to get my hands on your little template for empathy mapping myself. We have a couple questions from Matthew. What is the biggest differences between empathy mapping and user personas?
So I like to think that empathy maps help inform the user persona. So you can so once you've gathered all the data for an empathy map, you then kind of build out personas based on that. So it's kind of the first research step to get there.
And then, so once you've developed these empathy maps and personas, how do you keep from developing any stereotypes or generalizations based on these?
That's a good question. That's where research really helps, where you're not only like you have a pretty diverse group. So looking at getting those stakeholders in the room, people from different departments who have different perspectives of the customer, and you get them into the room and get all that diverse perspective, and also have customer research coming in and user interviews coming in. So you're able to make some assumptions based on at least data that you have. So that way you can have multiple personas coming out of multiple perspectives. So I'd say that would be the best, and anyone else feel free to chime in, but that is how I see it. You just have to diversify and get as many people involved as possible.
And keep going for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do one more and then save the rest for the end. Do you want to talk a little bit about like buy-in from like high-ranking stakeholders and avoiding the this is so stupid or corny and my time is too valuable for this?
That's a good question. I mean, you have to have a really good program manager or someone who's going to like force these people to come in. But I think what's super important is just showing them the value of something like this. And I mentioned it in the chat before, but like once you show them that how much this information helps influence the design, and then having that design be tested and usability goes through usability testing, and so it's like customers getting like excited about something, and you just show the value of that design that went through a proper process. Like those are the moments where I get super excited. I'm like, look, like see, like we got someone happy and stoked about our product because we went through the process, and like really bringing them in during the process and showing them that value. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I literally just love collaborating and just force people into it. And in terms of like it thinking it's corny, like, I don't know, if the mission is to get to know your customer, but you're not going to put in the work to do it, then I don't want to listen to you. I'm just being honest.
I love that answer. Cool. So we do have a few more, but we'll save it for like a big panel QA at the end. Thank you. I'm going to kick over to James to announce our last speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to welcome Tara Jensen to the stage. She's a staff UX designer at ServiceNow with over 10 years of experience in designing enterprise, defense, and speech technology experiences. Outside of work, Tara is also passionate about contributing to the local design community, and she's served on this cool organization called SDXD for 5 years as head of operations, president, and now as an advisory board member. For non-design related fun, you can find her at one of our amazing local beaches, hiking up a mountain, or learning how to cook a delicious new dish. Without further ado, I'll hand it off to Tara Jensen to speak more about visualizing the journey and journey maps.
Thank you for that epic intro, James. Let's see, so just kind of get the share going here and give you a sneak preview of a couple slides. Yeah, probably need to swap presenter view. Okay, cool. Okay, so journey mapping. Since customer retention has been a known concept, companies have been visualizing the journey to make their customers' journeys to make better product experiences. So I'm hoping I can teach you a little bit about how to do that on your own products so you can incorporate that into your own process. I'm gonna skip my intro since I already got a pretty decent one. We're gonna basically just cover a high-level introduction of what journey mapping is, you know, going into a bit of an overview of journey maps, where it fits in the design process, and then we'll walk through the steps of creating a journey map and cover the key takeaways that I'm hoping you gained as I walk you through this. So first things first, what is a journey map? So quick description is a journey map is basically a visual representation of the steps a person takes to accomplish a goal and the emotions that they experience along the way. And there are a bunch of different variations of it. You'll notice if you do like a Google search on journey maps, you might see a very different style that they use in marketing compared to the ones that you use in user experience. But generally, even with a lot of the marketing ones, there's some similarities. With the user experience ones that I'm going to cover, you'll notice like there's always details about the persona that you're focused on and the goal that they have, which we're seeing over here in this more simple version and over here in this more complex map over here. And then there's always the high level phases that the persona is kind of going through for that end-to-end focus, which we're seeing over here. And then up here with the dark areas over here, you can see theirs are a little bit less uniform. And then details about like the specific activities that the persona does within those phases, and sometimes also the tools that they're using to accomplish that, which we're seeing here and here. And then the UX journey maps always incorporate some sort of an emotional curve, those positive and negative feelings that this persona has as they're completing these activities within these phases. And then some of the thoughts that they're having along that emotional journey. So we're seeing that over here in this map. And then over here, we have 2 lanes of thoughts and 2 lines for the emotional curve, because in this map, they're actually looking at a employee and customer experience that maybe they're working to improve. These maps can get much more complex as you move forward, but we're going to kind of focus on a very simple version that incorporates these elements. But before we go into how do you create one, let's talk about what makes journey maps valuable. So the first reason, the first thing that makes them so valuable is that it helps you understand your customer, and primarily in the fact that it helps you see your product or service from that user's perspective, more of a outside in look rather than that inside out look that you have like when you're working with your coworkers and you understand like the inner workings of the product. It kind of helps separate you from like how that product works, how it was built, and just kind of see it for what that user would experience. It also helps create a shared understanding of the end-to-end experience, particularly for the people that are building this map together. You kind of really get a deep understanding of what this experience is before you start designing a new solution. And it can help eliminate assumptions, but that's only if you're basing your journey maps on user research. So if you're not doing that, you can definitely build journey maps based on assumptions. And it's a great way to get the assumptions out there. But if you're gonna move forward with everything just with an assumption map, you're sure to end up in a situation where some key stakeholders have competing assumptions, and you're gonna waste a little bit of time talking about whose assumption is the right assumption, when you can go do some user research to find out which one is actually right, or if there's some other assumption that, or something that you didn't think was happening. They also help identify gaps in your product experience. It definitely helps highlight pain in the current experience through these different lenses that you'll kind of see, which we'll kind of go into a little bit later. But it can definitely help you uncover unmet needs, especially if you're building your map to include things that happen before, after, and like in between product experiences, which often are not the parts of the experience that people look at, but can be where a lot of the opportunities lie. And it definitely aligns teams on real problems to solve. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can use that map once we have an example in front of you to kind of align on what you want to solve for. So the third primary reason that journey maps are valuable is because it helps teams explore opportunities and come up with innovative ideas. Looking at all these different things across all these different lanes, like kind of dissected and broken out into the different buckets that we have, it just really helps promote new ideas. Seeing the things people are thinking about and feeling along the way really kind of helps drive like the reasons why they might be doing something that maybe you didn't expect your users to do. It also creates an artifact to help convince stakeholders and other departments to drive positive change. So you can kind of take this map and use it as a way to share your story of customer pain and help and kind of help get more buy-in for why you might want to make a particular change to a particular product. It can also help you assess the impacts of change. So as you start building out these maps and you build more and more of them, and then start talking about changing parts of the experience, you can kind of pinpoint the point at which that's going to impact your customer within their journey. So when you want to do like a journey mapping workshop, you might want to involve some other people, or at least have people collaborate on your map with you. And we'll talk a little bit. So like if you can get an actual customer or user who actually has this task or completes this experience in their day-to-day life, it's a great way to incorporate some like, you know, some honesty into your map, I guess. Especially if you don't get the opportunity to do research up front, they can kind of help keep you honest. Any stakeholder who might make key decisions, this can really help with alignment for where you're going to be focusing your efforts and why you're going to focus your efforts in this part of the experience. Any product owners or managers who set product strategies, since these journey maps can definitely inform product strategy. And then with your creative teams, designers and writers, if they're involved in building this map with you, it'll just help them get their job done a lot faster. And with developers, if actually go the extra mile on what they're developing because they understand how much it's going to impact the experience. If you can include researchers, or if you have researchers who have insights to be digested related to what you're working on, that can be very helpful. But generally anybody valuable to the product experience. You don't have to have all these people. Generally I like to stay between like 3 and 7. And if you get more and more people, then, you know, potentially breaking them into groups. So the right time to start journey mapping is usually after you've done some research. I've actually done it on site with research while I was doing research, and then went through the journey with the customer afterwards in some cases. But afterwards is a great time to do it. Typically in the discovery phase before you're doing much of any design, because it will really help inform the designs, and before setting requirements or strategy for the product. So you are here just after the empathy map phase, and we'll see why in a minute. And when it comes to like doing this as a workshop, like you just really simple materials, very similar to what Jen kind of covered, stickies, Sharpies. Essentially, you'll just want a really big wall or a digital tool like Miro to have space to like map everything out. And if you have butcher paper, it helps you just kind of like take what you learned with you. We will also provide a journey mapping template, which I've used sometimes for like just note taking in research. And yeah, so I'm gonna jump right into what this template looks like. So you might notice there's some familiar looking things here. Do, think, and feel were also included in that empathy map. So empathy mapping is a great activity to do before journey mapping, before you lay this all out across the timeline. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on what you do in these phases, but first you need to figure out who is your persona and what is the goal. So before you start journey mapping, you want to start with the scope of your project. You can start like really broad with these. A lot of journey maps include things like before, during, and after as just like general, you know, product use or something like that. And you could also go like really specific on these things. So you can do like a whole end-to-end large piece, or you can, or dive into something specific. So for an example, if you were trying to improve travel experiences, you could go really broad with like the moment somebody decides they want to take a vacation to the point where they arrive at their destination, or possibly even when they arrive home. So that would be really broad, and would kind of set the scope for like how detailed are we going to go on this, you know, in this initial pass on this journey map. Or you could go more specific on a part of the experience you specifically want to improve, like maybe the car rental experience, which maybe you would start with the moment the plane lands to the point where they are in the car and they're figuring out the little intricacies of how this car is different than other cars. So kind of an example of setting that scope. Then you want to identify the primary persona and their goal for the project. So if we go back to the travel experience, You would have a very different set of needs with somebody who's doing like a family travel vacation, as opposed to like more of like somebody who travels for business on the regular. If you're going to have two primary personas, you're going to build out separate maps if they're drastically different like that. And then, of course, gather any insights from customer and user interviews to inform the map. Again, you can start with assumptions, but you'll want to follow up with research for accuracy. So these are those phases that were in the template that you'll get at the end. So, and generally, you'll want to follow these, in this order. At least when it comes to 1 through 4, you want to do those first before you jump into opportunities. So this first lane is those high level phases. So the end-to-end phases that a persona completes to accomplish their goal, which really sets the expectation for like how detailed are we going to get in this map. Then you're going to want to start filling out the do lane. So the activities and the actions that the persona completes within each phase. You might also want to include the tools that they use along the way, so you can kind of see how people are jumping in and out of different tools or bouncing around, and maybe there's opportunities there. Then you'll start thinking about like the think phase, the thoughts the persona has as they complete each activity within each phase. And a lot of times I'm kind of bouncing in between these lanes, because as you're listing the activities, the thoughts kind of come with it. And sometimes the thoughts inform the feelings. So in the lane where we have the feel portion, we include this little chart here. And this horizontal line is your neutral line. Everything that happens above it is those positive feelings, delight, excitement, etc. And then everything happening below is that frustration, anger, disappointment, all those negative feelings. And typically when I'm building out a journey map, I'm just kind of putting dots along this. And then later I'll connect the lines to create this curve. And then I'll list the specific emotions either below the line or right by the dots that I'm placing. The opportunities lane is something you'll want to figure out, get to once you've got your complete like end to end, all of these different lanes completed. Really focus in on what is the experience before thinking about what are some solutions here or opportunities. So based on everything you've mapped, list opportunities within each phase that will improve the persona's experience. And to jump into like an example of what this might look like using that template that we will provide for you. This is kind of an example, like maybe you wanted to improve a hospital experience with some high level phases here, which is very much aligned to before, during, after maybe a doctor visit. So initially patients will have symptoms, eventually they will get a diagnosis, and maybe then they'll end with a treatment plan. So some of the things that are going on in these phases, typically maybe your users notice symptoms and then they wonder, is this a big deal? Oh, it's probably nothing. They might discuss it with friends and then decide they're just going to wait and watch. And then maybe they'll wonder, should I see a doctor as symptoms maybe are starting to reappear, and then they schedule an appointment. So a couple things going on here, maybe some initial worry with those initial symptoms. Maybe they feel a lot better when they're like, oh, I don't think this is anything. And then they start getting concerned when they decide to finally book that appointment. And you can kind of see how like these two lanes sort of like inform each other and could potentially be spread out into like more detail across that timeline. One thing I do think that I can, in this example here, that would be based on potentially research rather than assumptions. Maybe like in this diagnosis phase, you notice that patients are bringing loved ones in to listen and take notes for them, and you start to wonder why, and you ask questions like, you know, why did you bring this person with you? And then that could be your opportunity to finding out like, you know, maybe they feel a little bit overwhelmed and shocked, and that causes them to not be able to absorb all this information that they're taking in, so they need this other person there with them. So research can definitely have a big impact on what ends up in your map. You'll also notice we have opportunities listed at the bottom, but not in every phase, and you might not come up with ideas for every phase, and that's okay. Sometimes the problem is that you have too many opportunities, and when that is the case, you can kind of look to this emotional curve as a guide. Areas where the curve gets really low, are usually kind of instant areas where it's like, okay, maybe we should do something here. This is a big opportunity. Or maybe this piece over here that isn't so low, maybe that's like a really critical part of your product experience. So you want to get that a little bit closer to the neutral line. But, you know, when it comes to prioritization with stakeholders, these really high points, maybe those are okay. You've got more bigger things to worry about over here and over here. So this can really help you make intentional decisions about prioritization and where design is really needed. So in that example, I kind of showed like how you could maybe spread this across a bit of a timeline, and that's where these simple materials get really useful, and maybe even workshopping with a couple other colleagues of yours. So if you're going to do a journey mapping workshop, one thing you want to make sure you have is plenty of wall space, because these things can get pretty long. Especially if you're not setting those initial phases, they can kind of go on for a really long time. So it is a good practice to set those phases and start with those. You can see they're kind of using different color stickies to represent each lane, which can help, you know, if you don't have like the masking tape to kind of create lanes for you. And then it can just kind of help you see like, okay, anything that is yellow is our opportunity. All of the things are orange. And then of course, you know, using Post-it notes helps a lot for like, you know, listing everything kind of horizontally and then being able to expand out as you realize that you've missed things. And then you'll notice also here, like we've got all purple stickies in front of Monique over here. There's a bunch of orange stickies over here. So basically what it looks like is, it looks like they might be listening to a customer interview or something like that, or looking at some research notes. And then each person is focused on a different lane. You know, one person is tasked with thinks, one person is tasked with feels, someone else is tasked with the do's. And that can just help like make sure you have everybody in your workshop engaged, because everybody has a job. And it can also just like make it a lot easier to make sure you don't miss anything. Because if you're trying to take notes on all of this, if you're listening to an interview or something like that, it's really difficult to keep up. So tasking people to have focused listening can really help. And then you kind of like, once you have all your Post-its built out, then you start, you know, mapping them against the wall. And then you kind of collaborate with your team, and they can help you like identify any gaps. So you'll notice there's a pretty straight line of blue Post-its here, but there's a couple like, these ones look like they may have been added in. So maybe the person who is writing out all the do's missed a few things that one of the other people in the room caught or called out. And then of course you want to digitize this in a tool that everyone can access, because these are living documents that keep on changing as you move through the design process. You learn more and more, and then you can kind of like zoom in on these different areas, especially if you started very broad. You can see they used butcher paper, so they could easily take this off the wall and digitize it later. You can easily snap a photo, but getting it into a tool like Miro, where you can kind of keep on moving and adjusting, allows you to just end up with a much better product in the end. Everyone loves a good Steve Jobs quote. I think this kind of wraps it up pretty well. So you've got to start with the customer experience and work back toward the technology, not the other way around. And these journey maps are very much about that, especially if you're including the things that happen before product use, after product use, in between product use. It's about that experience. It's not about the product or the technology initially. And that's where you find, you know, those innovative solutions. So these are the key takeaways I'm hoping you gained from what I have been explaining to you today. So use real user research so you don't miss those moments of truth in the experience, and also to make sure that you're not wasting time with stakeholders just talking about who has the right assumption. And intentional design and decisions. So that was kind of where I was going over, you know, that journey line and how you can say like, oh, we've got some really low points here. This is something we should really focus on, so we can try to bump this up a little bit. You know, this is like a really positive part of the experience. We don't have to worry about this right now. We've got bigger priorities over here, that kind of thing. And then of course, continue to build on the map as you move through the design process. Tomorrow we have a shook talking about storyboarding, and you might have noticed in one of the two examples at the very beginning, there was some images across the top. Storyboarding is something that could be kind of added into an existing journey map to kind of just help you tell that story. But you're always continuing to learn more as you move through those design phases. So continuing to add it into your map just kind of helps you move forward as you continue iterating and changing your products. And that's it. I think I stayed within 20 minutes. Thanks for listening. Any questions?
Yes, we do have a few questions. Okay. I've seen people use journey maps for their ideal user journey, but it sounds like you typically use it for mapping the user journey as it exists currently. Have you ever tried using it to map the ideal journey? And do you have any pro tips or words of caution about using journey maps in that way?
Well, the one thing I would be more worried, I haven't really done it for the ideal journey. I know that is definitely something that you could do, but I feel like it kind of allows teams to kind of miss the those points of empathy and the real problems, you know. I think it's better to start with what is the existing experience so that you really know what you're dealing with and where the opportunities are. So personally, I feel like mapping the existing experience is usually the better way to go.
Totally. I think that keeps you from making some of those assumptions that we were talking about earlier too.
Yeah, it kind of keeps you like in a safe space, sort of the space that you want to be in. Let's get them to the space that they don't want to see.
Second question, and then we'll just open it up to everybody. Journey map examples are so diverse. How do I know what info to include or exclude from my map?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. And I think a lot of the times in my early days, I spent a lot of times going into like really specific details, and you kind of just have to feel it out and realize, you know, how can we back out from this? How can we collapse these into like, I think you just kind of go with it as you're building it out. Like, cause I remember doing some where we got really specific into like the things that people were clicking on, and it's like, okay, we're going way too far here. In general, if we take all these post-its of activities and merge them together, what's this activity called? So you kind of just have to facilitate as you go, and try to keep a pulse on like, is this going in the right direction? How can we scale back? And then how can we go deeper if we need to? It's always, I think you can easily scale back and then decide later, okay, I want to zoom in on this area. Starting more broad and then realizing where those low points are can also be an indicator of maybe where you want to zoom in. Hopefully that answers the question.
I really like that, like zooming in on the low points part. That wasn't my question, but that did it for me. So I'll just start with this general everyone question from Peter. There seems to be some debate about this topic, but does one need to know how to code to do UX UI design?
Who wants to start? I have done some level of coding. I have had a lot of conversations with, at my last job, I was working at a DoD contractor, and they had the UX title, but it wasn't really UX roles. And we were expected to do HTML and CSS, and I enjoyed doing that, so it was fine with me. But my manager was a very technical person, and he wanted us to go a lot farther with our technical skills. And I had to draw a very defined line in the sand of, you know, if you go too far on implementation, that's really going to influence the design decisions that you make. It's just really hard to get out of that mindset of like, how would I do this as a developer? And really you need to separate yourself from that. I don't think you have to know code. I think it helps to be able to talk at a technical level with your developers. But I think some level of code is okay, because to me, CSS is very much more aligned with developer speak or designer speak than developer speak. So I think there are areas where it's okay.
100% agree with you. And I was doing more of a hybrid role. Design is my strength. Coding is not. I enjoy it, but like I am not the JavaScript whiz that the engineers on my team are. And so I found myself designing things that I could code. and that like kind of working the system a little bit that way. But I do think it's really valuable skill to learn like low level, at least, because then I think if you are working cross-functionally a lot, engineers listen to you a little bit more if you can at least speak their language.
I just want to add, I think, yeah, I don't think you need to know how to code, but at least understand, kind of empathize with the developer that you're going to be working with, and understand, like, if you're going to create a UI element, understand how it's going to be used across, you know, the experience, and just understand what pains they're going to go through if you do something crazy. So it's just understanding that level, I think, is super important.
Sure. Another general question, and then I'll jump back up and grab some of the ones we missed earlier. What are some good digital tools? You mentioned Miro for user research that can be done remotely.
There are so many. Miro and Mural are very similar. They let you do a lot of things. They're very robust. They're probably more expensive than some of the other tools, but you could use things like Google Draw. I think I've used once before. I don't know. What are some of the other ones?
For storyboarding, I've used Storyboard that. It's super easy to use, and it has kind of all this pre-populated stuff that, you know, it's just plug and play. So that might be another idea.
Cool. Another one from Peter. Is there any segment of UX UI industry that serves companies who deal with geospatial data web maps? He's currently coming from like a GIS background, doesn't want to manage people full time, and has kind of hit some barriers in his current career.
That is a good question.
So I don't know where you're at. Randomly, I have a company, I live in like the suburbs of Denver, but there's a software company here that does like, uses GIS for some kind of like tree mapping. I don't know all the details, but I do think there's like niches that you can bring your previous experience into UX UI, if that answers the question.
Was he looking for companies that do, like, because I know Esri, I don't know exactly where they're located. I think they're located around close to San Diego. They've done some conferences out here, and I know mapping is a big part of it. They did a couple workshops with SDXD, you know, mapping experiences and stuff like that. So there's definitely space for UX in those areas. And that's just one company I'm aware of that does it.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot out there that you can use your previous skills from. I think a lot of people that career change have a lot of success finding those niches. Back to the catch-up from Vina. How did you validate your design ideas? Did you do ride-alongs, record your interviews, etc.?
Yeah, we actually gave people, you know, the prototypes to play with actual ketchup in it. We gave people French fries and drinks. And so either, you know, it could have been like at a table or in the car where we gave them those different items. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, this one was also asked during yours, but I think it's a good, just general question. How do you measure success after you discover, let's see, I'm just trying to, after you discover is not, oh, how do you narrow success points when the project is continuing to iterate and loop?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to figure out kind of what, you know, for any kind of project, especially in industry, there's always like a finite amount of time for you to get to from beginning to end. That's sometimes a forcing mechanism to kind of get there. But I think the other thing is, you know, I think pretty quickly when you're talking to customers about whatever it is, you know, whatever topic, you'll realize that, you know, things will narrow pretty quickly. in terms of kind of, oh, wow, we've heard like a lot of different people kind of say the same things. And so it's really getting to that point where you're kind of thinking, okay, here are some, we've heard some similar themes, we have enough information, we can move on. So I think the pitfall that you just want to watch out for is that analysis paralysis, where you're getting more and more data. I think in this piece, it's okay to even jump too quickly to that next phase. You could move from kind of coming up with ideas to quickly prototyping and realizing like, oh, well, if we prototyped ketchup salt and everyone hates it, okay, let's move back to the idea phase and then figure out where else we could go.
Yeah, when it comes to the like success metrics, I think you mentioned in the question too, that's always very specific to your project and what you're working on too, I think. So like when you figure out like maybe where some low points are or something like that in a journey map, or, what that area is that you want to focus on to improve, trying to identify the indicators that you might have, like, is there potentially some quantitative ones that you can refer to, or do you have to go back to qualitative and do research to find out if you really solved the problem? Like an example, one of the projects here, we noticed like users dropped off at a particular point because things got really difficult. So like there was a pretty obvious quantitative indicator there of like whether or not there was success. And it's always very specific to the project though. So that's the metrics, success metric ones are always the hardest ones to answer at like a broad level.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that's something that you might want to even start thinking about when you kick off your project, right? Like, okay, well, we have, customer care data, we have analytics, so kind of identifying all those different pieces.
I think this is the last question, and it is for all of you, if you all want to weigh in. Do you only build journey/empathy maps based on a major project or major feature? And how big of a feature justifies one?
So the example I mentioned where I was part of a workshop where an empathy map being exercised was kicked off, and a bunch of stakeholders from literally legal, branding, different product orgs, like we all got together. And, to organize something like that requires a real big reason to get there. And what happened was, I think the reason that it was put together was because this common problem, without going too much into details, persisted across everything. This problem touched every department, and everyone was complaining about it so much that finally someone was like, all right, we need to organize this. Let's figure out the problem. Let's figure out what our customers are saying, and triggered this research into talking to customers and figuring out what the issues are based on that specific topic. And then that kicked off this entire workshop day where empathy mapping, journey mapping, customer journey mapping, service design, basically it all happened because it was a common problem across different orgs. That's for one example. It just persisted and was a big enough problem.
I've definitely been on projects where we didn't do it. I've been on projects where we did. For me, a lot of times it came when I was at a company that didn't have so many resources, and it was like 1 or 2 designer per project. A lot of the journey mapping was, for creating the login experience, we skipped it because we were like, okay, let's just get started. We needed to teach the company about UX practices and build it in anyways. But when you get to spaces that are really unknown, really complicated, I feel like they're very necessary at that point. But sometimes you're on a project that is just so fast paced, it's almost like there isn't time. If you can at least journey map with the experts that are on your team to make sure everybody is thinking about the same, end-to-end process, that can really help. Because I've been on projects where everybody had a very different idea of what the experience was, and it caused so many problems. And eventually, we thought we didn't have time to do it. And then we decided, okay, we have to do this because obviously there's some different assumptions going on here. Let's figure out what those are. So not doing it can cost money and effort. But yeah, once in my last job, when we kind of had gone through research a few times, there were just situations where it was okay, we can skip that because this seems pretty straightforward. And when you're in situations where you don't have a ton of resources, sometimes you have to make those decisions. They're definitely very useful though. Empathy mapping though, I also used that with my team, and somebody had asked the question of eye rolling. So I've actually used empathy maps for like lunch and learns with coworkers before, and had them empathy map, you know, other roles that they have a hard time dealing with, and then like realizing why those people maybe have those behaviors, and then building empathy for their team. And it really helps with team dynamics to improve them. And then that's like a really great way for people to see the value you can get out of those maps and reduce that eye rolling in the future.
Well said.
Love that you brought it back to that. I haven't seen any more questions come through in the chat, so I'm gonna assume we're wrapping. If you've been with us for any other meetups, we do like to do a little breakout room networking at the end if you would like to stay. So we're going to take a little break, and then I think James is going to head that up. James?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. On behalf of SDXD, the Denver UX Newbies, and ServiceNow, we'd like to thank you all for your time, and just kudos to everyone involved. We ended at 30 after, right on the dot. So if you have time, we would love to see you tomorrow for night 2 of this micro conference. We'll be featuring talks on storyboarding, how might we questions, and crazy eights. So thank you so much again. We'll be sending out the slides and resources shortly. And if you have time, please do take a bio break, grab a bite or a drink, and we'll be returning for some breakout room networking.